Why hello there everybody, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. You probably already knew that, but in case you didn't, welcome. I hope you'll give this video a like and subscribe down below for more bookish and travel and Disney and style content. Today is the last day of November, so it's time to give you guys a reading wrap up. I'm going to walk you through all the books I've been reading this month and what I'm planning to read in December. So I have two books that I don't have with me, so I'm gonna have to put their picture up right here. I figured I'd tell you about them first so I don't forget them. The first is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I was talking about Ayn Rand in my October reading video. I actually finished Atlas Shrugged really early in November. Atlas Shrugged, gosh, how do I even start? It was brilliant, it was challenging, it really makes you grapple with these different ideas. I didn't love it as much as I thought I would though. At the beginning of the book, I was all ready to be totally on board with Ayn Rand. Like, I was like, yeah, this is speak the truth. And then at the end of the book, I was like, oh, okay. I read online that Atlas Shrugged, I think it was Atlas Shrugged, it was one of Ayn Rand's books, but someone had suggested to her that she kind of write her philosophy as a novel. And I think that really does describe Atlas Shrugged really well, because as a work of philosophy, like explaining Ayn Rand's point of view, it's very effective. As a novel, it kind of fails as a novel in a lot of ways. I wasn't expecting it to. And of course, like, the length is just kind of insane. I read Anthem by Ayn Rand first, and I was so impressed with the writing and like how spare the writing was in that book. She didn't indulge herself, like she really cut it down to just the words that were necessary. Atlas Shrugged is not that kind of a book. It reminded me a little bit of, what book is it by? I think Samuel Richardson. It's like Clarissa or Camilla's by Fanny Burney. I think it's Clarissa that is like supposed to be the longest novel in the English language, and I tried reading it once. I got pretty darn far. I don't think I quite made it to the end. I did like sort of skim, but I skipped huge portions. And the reason I skipped was so many of the scenes just seemed to repeat themselves. Like, the characters would just literally have the exact same conversations, like going through the exact same problems like that they just went through 10 pages before, with like no difference, like no new nuance, no development. And to a certain extent, I feel like Ayn Rand did have a purpose in doing that. Like, she was trying to sort of emphasize what the culture in the book was and like how sort of deadening it was, but I do think it was too much and too long. I did skim parts, I will admit that. I didn't skim as much as I thought I would have, because the writing is really good and it is really engaging. For such a long book, it really does like pull you along. Like, there really is this kind of sense of suspense and like, I have to know what happens next. I have to find out what like the resolution of this is. Ayn Rand's philosophy is very black and white, and like intentionally, unapologetically so. There is good and there is bad, and if you're anywhere in between, you're just on the bad side, because she thinks you need to face up to problems and take a stand one way or the other. There's no in between for her. On the face of it, it's like, yes, definitely, because you shouldn't say, oh, well, it's too hard to decide what's good and what's bad, so we'll just throw both good and bad out the window. Like, that doesn't work. We all need to kind of define our own set of morals, our own set of standards, because that's just how we navigate our lives. Even if you say you don't have a set of standards, you kind of do. So I liked where she was coming from, but she makes it so extreme. Just one more thing I'll say though is that Dagny, as a character, I really liked her at the beginning, but she more than anybody else totally disappointed me. So this is totally spoilery. It's basically impossible to really talk about Atlas Shrugged without spoiling it. So this is your spoiler alert. So if you want to be able to come to Atlas Shrugged totally fresh, you should skip ahead to the next book. I felt like Ayn Rand never gave her a chance to really speak her piece, because she is very resistant to John Galt's plan and John Galt's world. And I feel like if she is as great of a person, like all of the main male characters of the book like love her, which was also a problem. If we're supposed to respect Dagny as much as these sort of best minds in the book do, then I felt like she should have been able to articulate what was holding her back from going with John Galt. And Ayn Rand never really gives her a chance to. And I feel like it was purpose-filled. Because going back to that kind of black and white, it's like Ayn Rand only wanted to articulate her own philosophy. Any other kind of view is just kind of thrown out the window. In fact, I think in an interview, Ayn Rand said something like, well, other people, you know, other people can articulate their own philosophies. This is my book, so I'm just going to articulate mine. But especially if you're dealing with a novel, it's really important to make counterpoints of view believable. And like some of the counterpoints of view were kind of believable. In fact, some of them were terrifying. Like when you read this book, you start thinking, oh my gosh, is this happening in the world? But the only points of view like that were these extreme ones. In order to succeed as a novel, it would have needed a convincing alternate point of view. And I felt like Dagny should have possessed that. There were these moments when it was like, okay, this is Dagny's moment. Like surely she's gonna, you know, speak her piece now, and she didn't. And in fact, this kind of disappointed me most of the time. It was because she just sort of was going weak at the knees about one of the main guys. I felt like it was kind of just this red herring. Like instead of having Dagny actually speak up, let's just throw in this instead. Feminists must really dislike Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand. It is kind of puzzling because Ayn Rand, I'm not positive, by the way, if I'm pronouncing her name right, and if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm very sorry. But the author and the main character are both women, so you would think there would be like a little bit more of like an appreciation of women, but it felt kind of like the opposite. In fact, she even says explicitly that like in John Galt's world, there are way more men than women. There are hardly any women. Throughout the book, it seems like there's something about women that makes them more susceptible to becoming moochers and looters, and but she never really goes into what it is or anything like that. Yeah, that was a little bit of a frustrating undercurrent as well. But I would still definitely recommend it, and I'm really glad I read it. Okay, spent way longer on that than I meant to. So my next book is called The Busmans Honeymoon. It's by Dorothy Sayers. This is the 4th book in the Peter Wimsey and Harriet Vane series. I didn't even realize it existed. The other 3 are Strong Poison, Have His Carcass, and Gaudy Night. Gaudy Night is my favorite. It takes place in Oxford. Lord Peter and Harriet Vane do get engaged at the end of it. And so many books do end like that. Like they end like right before the happy ending almost. So it was really, really fun that you get to see their honeymoon. You get to see like kind of the beginning of their married life. I loved how the book started because it started with like all these letters from like various people to their friends about Peter and Harriet's wedding. And many of them are characters from the other books. This is definitely not the Harriet and Peter to start with. I feel like you wouldn't really appreciate this if you hadn't read the first 3, but if you have read the first 3, this is a real treat. Of course, Lord Peter and Harriet can't just have a normal honeymoon. There's gotta be a corpse and a mystery in there. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. So I went to the library and got a couple of things, which is why these aren't super exciting covers or anything, but they are pretty exciting books. This is Mariah Edgeworth in France and Switzerland. It is selections from the Edgeworth family letters. Mariah Edgeworth, in case you don't know, was a contemporary of Jane Austen. She was actually hugely popular, like way more popular than Jane Austen in that time period. Jane Austen was a fan of Mariah Edgeworth. I've read Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. I'm thinking of starting like maybe Castle Rackrent or another one of her novels, but it is really fun to get a glimpse of her through her family's letters. And of course it's even more exciting because these are all travel letters. It's so fascinating to see like all the things that are the same, like, you know, frustrations about a hotel that's too expensive or like a long day on the road. But then of course these are 2 trips, 1802 and 1820. So right after the French Revolution is the first one. I think her dad meets Napoleon, and so she constantly mentions like, you know, things, portrait paintings that have been taken to Paris because of the revolution. I really liked Belinda. I thought her writing was very engaging and definitely pulled you in. Jane Austen is so unique that her writing is so timeless and so sort of fresh. You don't feel like you're reading an old book. Other authors, like Fanny Burney, for instance, I like Fanny Burney's books. She was another contemporary of Jane Austen and Mariah Edgeworth. In fact, it's fun, Mariah Edgeworth is constantly mentioning like Fanny Burney or Mrs. Radcliffe, like all these people who, if you like Jane Austen, you'll recognize. Fanny Burney, for instance, feels a little bit more dated. I haven't read Mrs. Radcliffe, but I have a feeling she would read more dated too. But Mariah Edgeworth comes closest, I think, to Jane Austen in being very approachable and relatable. It just has so many really interesting anecdotes that she puts into her letters. She tells about they were climbing a bell tower and the bell started ringing, and she was saying it was a sublime experience but also kind of a disagreeable experience because it was like so loud and hectic. My other book here is Totality and Infinity by, how do we pronounce, Emmanuel Levinas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. An essay on exteriority. This is philosophy. I first heard about it in that book at the Existentialist Cafe. This book right here, which I loved so much. And the author, Sarah Bakewell, of this book mentions so many philosophers, and she makes them all sound like absolutely fascinating. Like you have to drop everything and go and read them. And after I read that book, which was back in the spring, I did go and look up a bunch of the philosophers, but some of them kind of fell off my list. But I found Linus at the library the other day and thought it'd be really fun to give it a try. This book, A Writer's Diary, being extracts from the diary of Virginia Woolf, is like a bad penny. It just keeps popping up in my reading wrap-ups. I got this back in the spring, but I've just been working my way through it so slowly, and that's the way I always kind of approach Virginia Woolf. It's so funny. So I try to remember to use a bookmark to mark my place, but sometimes I forget. And when I forget and I have to like go back and try to find where I left off, I'll like find some passage and I'm like, yeah, I bet this must be it. And I'll start reading. I'll be like, yeah, I don't remember reading this. This is really fascinating. But then after a couple pages or a couple paragraphs, I'll get to a section that I'm like, wait a minute. I definitely did read this before, and I totally missed this like beautiful paragraph or sentence or description. She's kind of like Jane Austen in that way, because I feel the same way about Jane Austen. Like whenever I reread it, there's so many things that I just totally missed, and it's because it is so rich. There's so much to take in. This also is making me want to read and reread Virginia Woolf's fiction and novels, because this is the diary she kept when she was writing them. And it's so fascinating to hear about her process, to hear about her frustrations, to hear about how she felt when the reviews came out, and of course there are just so many beautiful descriptions and such good writing and fun observations on writing. She says, anyhow, nature obligingly supplies me with the illusion that I am about to write something good, something rich and deep and fluent and hard as nails while bright as diamonds. I've been on a bit of a Tolkien kick this month, guys. I borrowed these books from my dad. These are some of Tolkien's short stories. I have read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings in the past, and I did really like them. But I've never really tried his short stories. One that I don't have right here, but I actually read it online, was Leaf by Niggle, which was, definitely my favorite. It was so sweet and like so deep and beautiful. And I just loved the idea in it that your work isn't done in this life. You want to create something. If you have this vision of something, some story or painting or whatever it is that you want to make, and you try to kind of bring that vision to life, but you feel like you're failing, you'll never be able to make it all the way you see it in your mind. And Leaf by Niggle really reaffirms that you've got time. In fact, you even got time in the afterlife, and maybe what you were wanting to create, wasn't meant to be created in this life. Maybe what you wanted to create couldn't have been created in this life. And maybe all those interruptions and things that were frustrating you and you felt like were keeping you back actually are going to be the things that help you. I also finished Farmer Giles, oh guys, I don't know how you pronounce that. Farmer Giles of Ham, which has got dragons and knights and villagers and giants and talking dogs, that's Garm, and dragon talks too. This was just really delightful and a fun tale. These editions have lots of really cool illustrations, and Tolkien himself illustrated these things, which is pretty awesome. This one is called Smith of Wootton, Major. Haven't started this one yet, but definitely excited to get going on it. I also thought I would try this. This is The Father Christmas Letters by JRR Tolkien, which I feel like I've seen some of these illustrations before. They're really beautiful, but I don't think I've ever actually like looked at these Christmas letters, so I feel like it's a good season to be looking at this. And I'm also thinking I might reread Sister of the Angels by Elizabeth Goudge. This is the author of A City of Bells. You've probably heard me talk about that. I absolutely love that book so much. The delightful thing is that A City of Bells does have 2 sequels. Would you call them sequels? They're more like children's books, like The Little White Horse, Elizabeth Goudge is really well known for, and that's technically a children's book, although it's so beautifully written and such a great story that anyone would enjoy it. I would highly recommend that too. I'll link all the books that I'm mentioning down in the description. But it is wonderful that you get some more of the story. This is one of the books, Sister of Angels. This is kind of the Christmas story. But there is apparently also a book called Henrietta's House. And I feel like there are some hints about Henrietta's house in this book, and even honestly in A City of Bells. It's fun that these little threads kind of lead to their own books. But yeah, I will probably reread this one because it is very Christmassy and beautiful and very short, as you see. This edition is by Girls Gone By. Henrietta's house has the cutest cover. I feel like I might have mentioned this before, but I know that Girls Gone By did publish Henrietta's house with the cute cover in paperback, which is kind of what I like because I loved it for it to kind of match this one. But Henrietta's house and I think Sister of the Angels are kind of hard to get. I'll do my best to link these down in the description, but they might only be used copies. I wish they would come out with these two again because they have come out with A City of Bells. There are now, well, no, there might only be one edition, but there have been different publishers re-releasing Elizabeth Googe's books, which in the past they've been very difficult to find. You had to get used copies, so it's wonderful that Elizabeth Googe is easier to find. I just hope they'll grab her lesser known books too. You guys, I was almost forgetting Kim. I don't know how I could have done that because I loved reading this so much. I had already put it in my pile of Penguin English libraries because they look so pretty with the spines lined up, so I didn't have it in my stack. I mentioned this in my October reading video. I would highly, highly recommend it. It's funny, I felt like it was a little bit slow going. Like I did enjoy it from the outset, but I wasn't really pulled in, but then especially like after maybe the first 100 or so pages, I was totally pulled in and I finished it so quickly. It is so cool to see where Kim's adventures take him, and the setting of this book is so vivid and immersive. It's one of the most colorful and impressive of really any book that I've read recently. It just totally kind of surrounds you with the sights and the sounds and the tastes of India. And it's such a melting pot of different cultures too. I feel like faith is a really beautiful kind of undercurrent, you know, sort of subtle theme in this book, because you hear about so many different faiths. You have the Hindu faith, you have Muslims, you have Buddhists, the Lama, the ascetic priest that Kim accompanies on his adventures. They keep saying that he's like a sort of variation of Buddhism, and it feels like all of the people in this book, it's almost like they each have their own kind of interpretation of their religion, and it makes for such a rich and deep telling. I'm not very familiar with the geography of India, so I did feel like the fact that I didn't recognize all these place names was part of what made it like so sort of mysterious and exotic. And yet, I feel like there's definitely an element of mystery that is there no matter what. It feels like there's like magic in the air, you know? Of course, there's also the theme of imperialism because you have the British in India. I love, though, that Kim himself, he is a sahib, his parents were Irish, but he's grown up kind of in the marketplace, in the bazaar. They call him the little friend of all the worlds. So through Kim, you're really able to see from a different point of view. Like, this is not from a British point of view. You kind of see the British as outsiders. And, you know, I love British literature, so I've definitely read things from the British point of view, but I really, really liked this kind of turning on its head. Since finishing this, I'm constantly repeating to myself, we are all upon the wheel, which is what the llama says. So anyway, definitely would recommend checking this out. All right, I think that was the last one. I don't think there's anything else I'm forgetting. The light today just keeps coming and going. I hope you all had a wonderful month and have been reading many lovely books. I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed. As always, I hope you have a magical and a bookish day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, guys.